SHADIVERSITY.
Greetings, I'm Shad, and I have something exceptionally awesome and special in store for us today. I am here with the man, the myth, the legend, Brandon Sanderson himself. How are you, Brandon?
I am great. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Now, Brandon, as it turns out, let me preface this before I begin. I'm a huge fan of Brandon, been one for many years, but it turns out I discovered recently that Brandon is slightly a bit of a fan of yours truly as well, and he's been watching my YouTube channel. Now, because of this, I'm deeply interested, Brandon. How did you discover my YouTube channel? What kind of zoned you in on it?
So let's go back a few years. I discovered just generally the kind of Hema YouTube scene number of years ago with the way a lot of people did with Lindy Beige, right? For me, it was Lindy Beige's video he did about torches, where he showed, hey, if you hold the torch in front of yourself, you can't see anything. If you hold it back here, you can. And that clicked something in my brain that I'm like, oh, wow. You know, I have been fed on pop culture, and I am a writer of pop culture, and there are very simple, practical things that we don't get because we just didn't live back in the day. And so I kind of binged on Lindy Beige. And Lindy Beige, his channel is great, but it is all over the place, right?
Yes.
A bunch of dance lessons. You're going to get all of his philosophy on politics and things.
And it's all
once in a blue moon, you will get some sort of medieval martial arts or lifestyle thing. And I was like, oh, man, I wish there were a channel that actually just focused on this.
Indeed.
And so I started searching around. I ended up, I watch a lot of, and I can't say his name real well, but it's Matt Easton, right?
Scholar Gladiator.
Scholar, and his channel is also great, but it also is in some ways a little too narrow, right? In that if I want to do a fight scene between a guy who's got a spear and a guy who's got a knife, which I did in Oathbringer, I go pull up the Hema demonstrations on Matt Easton's channel where he's like, all right, here are 20 bouts of spear versus knife and watch them, and then I'll offer a little bit of commentary. That is so useful. But he does a lot of reviews of swords and things. Still a really great channel, but it still wasn't quite getting I need practical advice on what it was like to live in the Middle Ages and or to use some of these weapons. And so I had mentioned this to one of my assistants, and he said, oh, I got the guy for you. You got to go watch Shad's channel. And this is Adam, who's my in-house publicist and marketing thing. He had just watched one of yours on travel or something. I can't remember what it was. But he's like, you got to go watch this guy. And so I started watching your videos, and it wasn't until I was a few videos in that I noticed you had my books on the shelf behind you. I don't know when you put those on, but the first videos, I didn't even see them. But I'm like, oh, this guy's exactly what I wanted. This guy's doing all the cool stuff that I need because being a novelist, you are one yourself, you've got to be a jack of all trades, right? You need to know some psychology. To be a fantasy novelist particularly, you need to know some geography. You need to know some physics. You need to know, economics. You need a bit of everything. Yep. And so it takes more work than most of us can do to become experts in all of those. So I look for experts in any area I need. When I was writing Stormlight and I needed a field medic, I just went and I got one. I went and hired a field medic and said, hey, read this and tell me where I'm being stupid about field medicine. And so having a channel like this that just kind of says, hey, here's what it's like to try to make a back scabbard that works, right? Here's a real look at this, and stuff like that. You did a torch one recently too, I believe. Yep. That sort of stuff is just really handy for writers. And so I started recommending your channel because it kind of hit that sweet spot. Enough pop culture understanding to know what writers would need, but enough medieval understanding to just tell us the stuff that we're going to get wrong. So that's why I started watching.
That's awesome, and you're absolutely right. I focus my channel on basically the intersection between pop culture and history, because there are some times when, honestly, you need to supersede what was done historically for the sake of the setting and what's happening in the fantasy and stuff. Right. But there are some times...
Speaking as a guy who has very unrealistic swords of unrealistic proportions in his books, yes, sometimes you do.
Absolutely, exactly. Yet also there are sometimes where it's the complete reverse, where the practical historical thing is what would actually make far more sense in the fantasy setting.
Yeah.
And I love that kind of duality, conflict, and interaction between the two. And so, interestingly enough, I'll share a bit of a inside secret to my channel. A lot of these factoids that I share on my YouTube channel actually came from research that I was doing for when I started writing. Like, I started writing in a medieval setting, and I love the medieval period already, and I soaked in heaps of as much information as I could, but then I really wanted to get it as accurate as I could. This was going to be a real medieval setting, so I started doing crazy research on medieval things, and because I already loved it, I could kind of, I remember you saying that it doesn't take you too long to get to 80% of the knowledge, but to get the remaining 20% of the knowledge, that can take a lifetime. Yeah. I've been basically spending my time doing that. There's like, trying to fill in that last 20% to get as complete a picture.
That's perfect, because people like you do it, the rest of us can benefit from it. So
exactly.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Now, on this note of Brandon actually watching some of my content, we have a bit of a big announcement to make. And I think I'll handball this off to Brandon and let him announce this for us.
Well, I mentioned that I do look for consultants on books, and I actually, on Oathbringer, tried several people to get consultants that were not able to do it. Maybe they would have caught the whole longsword problem for us. But when I started watching Shad's channel, I'm like, I'm going to try him. So I asked Shad if he would consult on the next Stormlight book, and he graciously said yes. So you'll be able to look forward to hopefully a little more accuracy in a few places where I slide. You'll probably find it interesting. You called me out on the longsword thing, which you totally should have.
I had to. I was like, I couldn't help it.
We actually had that different in the original text. Mm-hmm. And one of my editors changed it, saying, no one knows what arming sword is. Change it to longsword. And I didn't know. I'm like, I don't think that's right. I think this is an arming sword. In fact, you can find other places in Oathbringer where it is just called arming sword or side sword. And I wasn't sure. And I just I'll just let this slide. But if I'd had the historical person being like, no. The fact that we call them longswords is actually inaccurate. Back then, they would have called it an arming sword. Longsword was a two-handed sword. That's why it's a longsword. This needs to be an arming sword. And if I could just point to that, then my editor would have been like, oh, okay. But since I didn't have that to pat, and I had 100 things to do, I'm just like, all right, just leave that one. Sure, he wants it to be a longsword.
Well,
but I wrote it as arming sword.
There you go. You've been redeemed. We've heard it officially now, okay? Brandon knew it was arming sword. But look, that whole chapter, Momentum, it was actually really well written. Like when he grabs the poleaxe and just hammers it down.
Right.
And it was actually very well done. That was a standout for me. Apart from that one little word, but that's only a minor thing. Yep. Overall, it was actually really well done. And I suspected that you were informing yourself somewhat in regards to that type of combat and things.
I knew about the poleaxe thing, right? That I had read about, and I'm like, I'm going to get this in there because this is how they would really, really do it. And I wholesale stole the whole arrow thing from the myths about Genghis Khan, right? I've always loved reading about the Mongol invasion and things like that. And anytime I can find some little trick like that I can stick in that was actually, I don't think it actually happened to Genghis Khan, but it is one of the legends surrounding him. Anytime I can sneak something like that in, it feels really juicy and cool to me because I'm not a medievalist, right? I'm a pop history fan, but I'm not a medievalist. George is the medievalist. If you want a real fantasy author who's a medievalist, either you or George.
Though, having said that, I started Game of Thrones, and he mentioned he calls a sword a longsword at the beginning of the book, but he does not reference if it's one-handed or two-handed. I'm lost. I don't know what his prefer is like. If I was to trust him and say, all right, he knows what he's talking about, he would know it's a two-handed sword, but it's not mentioned in the book, and that name has become so pervasive with one-handed swords, you just don't know. But you're right. One of my favorite graphic novels is written by George R.R. Martin, in case people don't know what I'm talking about. Yeah. But The Hedge Knight, it's absolutely phenomenal. So good. But there you go. So, people, I'll be consulting on Stormlight 4, which is just phenomenal. And like Brandon, I've already been brainstorming, because this is something I've been wanting to do already, is to actually, shard blades, dueling, one-on-one. how would you really fight with them? Like, let's break this down. The specific type of techniques, and there's some interesting conclusions that I've already kind of thumbed out because, like, I'm getting off topic. I won't go too far. But what's interesting when you look at traditional greatsword manuscripts and fighting styles and stuff like that, there are far more attacks to the lower body than with longsword because the greatsword has so much reach that you can actually reach the lower body without exposing your upper body too much, and you can stay out of their range. And so there's these big, wide, sweeping attacks to the lower body. But in contrast, when you try and apply that to shard blades, you wouldn't necessarily do that if you were fighting someone with a shard blade, but if you're fighting someone without a shard blade, lower body attacks. That would be a very common attack. Like, it just when you break it. So I've already been thinking about it quite a bit.
I think it will be very helpful.
Oh, it's going to be great.
Fortunately, one of my artists is a fan of historical effect books of dueling styles and fighting styles and things, and we've kind of let him guide us a little bit on how we think it would happen, but he's nowhere near the expert you are. So we'll look forward to seeing how what we get.
Oh, I can't wait! It's going to be so awesome. Like, really, I'm very excited. I've already made a semi replica of Sunraiser for me to just get in the right size and kind of hang around. And so there will be a video, but we'll be waiting. We'll be holding that back for a special time. So that's going to be very awesome. And there you go. Huge announcement for everyone right there. But now, while we have Brandon, we're just going to be having a great chat about what he does. Now, I probably should have prefaced this before we began the video, but better late than never. Brandon is basically one of the most popular fantasy authors in the world. His books are just absolutely phenomenal, and one of the things that I love about Brandon's work so much is how much care and consideration he gives to things that we've already been talking about, and we can see how much consideration has been put into his previous works already, where he tries to bring in such beautiful realism into his book, and even if it's not realism, just practicality and believability. Like, you consider so much, even about how there are big, like, chasm fiends, which are like carapace type monsters in Stormlight Archives. You even try to figure out, okay, would they even be able to support their own weight? What about the weight of the bridge that these guys are carrying? Like, oh no wood in the world would be able to be that light enough for them to carry it. That's all right, we can make a fantasy wood, but it makes it realistic and believable. I love that you have that attention to detail in your books. It makes them so much more immersive. And so if any of you have not read any of Brandon's books, highly recommend it. Mistborn is generally the entry point for most of your fan base, I believe.
Yeah. I generally recommend Mistborn. Way of Kings is better. It is a stronger novel in almost all respects, but it also is a novel you need to trust me first for, right? The reason that I point people at Mistborn is, number one, the first book stands on its own. You get a full story in one book, which I don't promise with Stormlight, right? You will get themes and arcs that will be finished in every book, but it's a large fantasy series, and Mistborn stands on its own. It does a little bit of everything that I do, that I try to do in my books. Way of Kings, like I said, it's a little better. This is partially because instead of I'm letting myself go away from some more traditional tropes and build a weirder world, a more fantastical world, and something I've really wanted to do. But the learning curve is just, way steeper, right? Way of Kings starts with like 4 different viewpoints from 4 different opening chapters, right? And none of them, it's like the 4th one is the main character. And so you get 3 not main characters starting off and stuff like that. Like, it just all this stuff that you're supposed to never do in books, I do because of the payoffs that it allows me to build toward.
Exactly. And I mean, I actually loved the way you introduced Kaladin in Way of Kings, where it was from the perspective of someone else. I won't say who it is, but just seeing the character contextualized through the eyes of other people was brilliant. It was great. Loved it. So, I want to talk more about this whole kind of a realism dichotomy in fantasy a bit, but before we get there, just some casual, fast questions, get the ball rolling and stuff, and get us a bit loose, but we're already pretty loose. We've been talking for a while already. So, Brandon, what is your favorite fantasy sword?
Stormbringer. Michael Moorcock, Elric's series. You can tell that I love Stormbringer from the fact that I created a sword that talks and kind of does some of the same things. Nightblood's very different personality than Stormbringer, but I remember reading the Elric books even as a teenager and being like, wow, this is really cool, because he took heroic fantasy, the kind of stuff that was done, the Conan style, short, pulpy things, and he put this really interesting character who did not fit the genre into the lead role and wrote these really interesting stories that are 1/2 pulp and 1/2 deep character psychological studies, and that's the sort of thing that I love. So if you guys haven't read the Elric books, they're great. Michael Whalen did these gorgeous covers for them. Not originals, but the original covers are great too. Just, yeah. So, but by the way, they're a kick in the face, okay? Stormbringer is basically, it's not explained in this so many words, but it's basically a sword that keeps the main character alive. Without it, he would die. Or at least be an invalid, and helps him save the world. But in order to keep functioning, Stormbringer basically needs to suck the souls of the people he loves most. So, you know.
Yeah, you win some, you lose some, eh?
Yeah.
I'm a bit of a traditionalist when it comes to it, and so my favourites probably are not nearly as interesting as people would suppose, but I love it when swords are depicted in accurate proportion and design and stuff, and of course there's the magic. So I gotta say Narsil or is it? Hang on, I got it written down. Anduril? How do you pronounce? Yeah, I have trouble, but it was designed so well in the Lord of the Rings film. And the other one,
they did a great job.
Beautiful. The other one, I'm so on the fence about this one because it might, I've seen depictions where it's beautiful, and it's Rand's Heronmark sword from Wheel of Time.
Oh, right.
Because technically, in my opinion, this should be a Kriegsmesser or a two-handed falchion, going with the correct aesthetic with a slightly upturned hilt, and the people could go too far with it and design it like a katana, which would break my heart. But some of the people have made it in real life, and it looks awesome. And it's just a sword that never dulls and sharp and everything. I know there are bigger magics, but something just practical and functional that it just really appeals to me. I love that.
Knowing Jim, having visited his armory, I would guess that one of the swords in his armory, he had hundreds of swords, perhaps thousands. I would guess he had one that was the Rand's Heronmark sword that he was using as a model, because anytime he would write a fight scene, he would just go grab one of the swords and say, all right, this guy has this sword, this guy has this sword. And he was a little obsessive about his collection.
That is wonderful to hear. I didn't know that about him. That should be like top of his profile right there. Loves swords. And just on a side note, actually, my About the Author page in my book has only one sentence, and it says he likes swords. And I figure that's enough. Done. My job is done here. There we go. All right then, Brandon. What is your favorite 80s cartoon show?
80s cartoon show. I would probably say Robotech. I'm not a huge anime person. I have watched some that I really like, but I can still remember as a kid. And Robotech lives in this weird world where it's half Western and half not, because it was like a Japanese show that they took and redubbed and made their own story for. But as a kid, I remember watching all of the shows, the He-Man, the G.I. Joe and all these, and enjoying them, but then landing on Robotech and having it not, have a continuing story, like an epic grand scale story, hooked me right away. Like the idea that I didn't have to be fed this 22-minute packaged story that basically repeated itself every episode, that I could be trusted as like an 8 or 9-year-old with a story that I could follow across multiple episodes. That alone changed how I view storytelling in cool ways. So
awesome. I'm a bit divided on this because technically I'm a child of the 90s mostly than the 80s. If I was to say strictly 80s, it would have to be He-Man, one of the classics. But there's this other cartoon that came out more in the 90s, but I think it might have fallen into the 80s slightly, and it's called Techno Man. But it's a typical thing because it is an anime, but the Techno Man is the English version, and the Japanese version is actually not entirely kid-friendly, and it's called Tekka Man Blade. But they kind of really hacked it up for the kid-released English version on TV, but it was amazing. Like, it was so good at it. One of the key things about it had that continuous storyline where it wasn't just, 20 minutes of them doing one thing and then 20 minutes of them doing it. It was this overarching thing, and the animation blew me away, and the story. And so I'm not sure, have you ever heard of Tekka Man or Techno Man?
I haven't. Though I know you 90s kids are spoiled, right? Because you had Batman the Animated Series, which was amazing, and really trusted its audience. You had all the Spielberg collaborations, right? So you had Looney Tunes, and you had not Looney Tunes, Tiny Toons. You had Animaniacs. You had Freakazoid. Like we were not trusted as kids, right? The shows just. They were fine, but they didn't betray a lot of trust in the viewer.
All right, moving on. Brandon, important question. Do you own a sword?
I do own several swords.
Yes.
I actually cut my wedding cake with a sword.
Me too.
I bought all my...
Me too.
I had always said I was going to buy swords for my groomsmen, right, and my one groomswoman, and they never believed me. So when we did, I bought them all arming swords, right, and I got myself. It's a replica of. It's a hand and a halfer. One of the Richards had it. It's a replica of one of his. It just looked cool to me, and so yeah. I am not as much a sword enthusiast, obviously, as you are, or Robert Jordan, but I do like to handle them, to hold them. I haven't done a ton of HEMA.
That was another
good
question.
friends of mine were in. Yeah, I need to do more. The good friends of mine in college were in what they called Battle Guard or something. It was just HEMA with the foam swords and things like that. And I never got into that because I just didn't. But I watched a lot of it. I'm kind of a guy who sits at the side and scribbles down. And I love to go watch people actually fight. I need to do more of it myself. I need to know what it feels like and things like that. But I at least will usually handle a sword and say, all right, this is what this feels like. This is what it feels like to swing. This is the heft on it. And I have a couple of typical swords that I can use in that regard.
Gee,
I also own one of Robert Jordan's swords they gave me.
That's wonderful.
It's actually cool. It's got gold and red dragons hand painted on the hilt. It's a Meiji era katana.
Ooh,
so
lovely. Gee, I wonder what type of swords you have. I wouldn't be able to say, of course, because I haven't seen it. But there's such a difference between like a stock standard, sword wall hanger essentially, and then one that's been made to the right standard qualities. Because when you feel it, you really do feel the difference. And so next time you're in Australia, Brandon,
okay. Where are you in Australia?
Victoria. I'm just east of Melbourne. Okay. So if you ever come near Melbourne, easy to.
I'd love to come try the swords out. You could do a fun video with a fantasy author tries actual swords and makes a fool of himself.
Don't let me down, Brandon. That does get me kind of excited. Seriously.
Next time I'm out, I will make it happen. I've been there twice. I usually come out for Supernova. They fly authors out and things like that. So. Next time I go, it's hard to get to Australia. I don't know if you've ever come to the States, but that is a beast of a flight.
It is. But Supernova, actually, I'm going to write that down because I could probably contact them. And my channel is of the size now. I have been getting requests to attend some of these panels and conventions.
I recommend Supernova. If you're looking, they've done a very good job. They're a Comic-Con style convention, but they do panels. The panels have been good. They're well attended. I've always felt well treated by them. So
that's great. I'll contact them, and I don't know. Maybe we'll get on a panel or two together. That would be great.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So you own your own sword, Brandon, because you're already pretty high. I wasn't sure if you could get any higher than that, but cutting your wedding cake with a sword. Only legends do that. So, how is your evil Lair underground bunker progressing?
So it's going slowly. Nobody really knows what to do with this thing. All the city people who had to give us permits and stuff took forever because they're like, you want to do what? And I'm like, it's an underground supervillain lair. They're like a survivalist bunker? I'm like, no. No, it's a lair. It can't be a bunker. Bunkers don't look cool. So it's going slowly. But this is what happens when, we fantasy authors get too successful. I know Jim Butcher built like a LARPing compound with an actual castle on it and stuff. I'm building a supervillain lair. Slow. We still don't have we've got it framed and things now, and the walls are going up. So I'll get some more pictures out eventually of that. The theater is still a big mess because we have to do all sorts of speakers and things like that. But it's gonna be cool in a few years.
That's awesome. I mean, my own dream is castles, of course. I'm gonna live in a castle, and I'm gonna build a castle that's historically accurate to have run as a side business as well. But I've already designed it, so. There we go. But when I heard about that bunker, I was just like, that is awesome. So cool. So there you go, Brandon, a super villain bunker. So interesting question. Have you thought about starting a YouTube channel?
Yeah, I have. I don't know that I would ever do it just because it is a lot of work, as you know. If I were going to start a YouTube channel, the area I think I could do something that would be helpful would be doing something that's more along the lines of 5 to 10 minute writing advice things that have the animations. Think of a CGP Grey type thing, except only focused on writing topics like, here's the hero's journey, here's how to use it, here's promises and payoffs and things like that. More focused maybe even on high school. Like if you're teaching a creative writing class in high school and you need a 5-minute video to kick off a lesson each day, you go to this and you do that. I don't know that I would do the full-blown all-in YouTube channel thing just because I'm too busy, right? And whatnot. But that's what's been in the back of my head.
I mean, personally, I feel you would kill it if you did a YouTube channel. You already have such an established fan base, but you have this other thing is where you're super knowledgeable and you can talk about a wide breadth of things in a very engaging and interesting way. And that is like one of the golden gooses of YouTube, essentially. And so, like, just some, I guess, pointers here and there. I think there is a way that you could do it in a sustainable way fairly regularly, but it would require, say, hiring an editor and someone just to set up the camera. And if they could just, like, set up the camera and where it's just like, oh, you're ready to film? You sit down 5-10 minutes, do a video and say, all right, I'm done. And you could record multiple at a time and then just hand it off to the editor and say, get those done. He could manage the YouTube thing. Because YouTube is amazing. In my opinion, it has more reach than Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, anything. Like the breadth that it has, the legs that it gives you, and the reach is just amazing.
My only problem would be that I would probably want to do it scripted, which is probably a bad idea, right?
I don't know. See, I don't script my videos. I talk off the cuff, and
that's why I say it would probably be a bad idea to script because it would just take so much upfront prep.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it's too much time for one. For me, especially, I know there are a lot of people who script, and that's fine. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but for me, no, it doesn't work. And the other thing is, it makes me too wooden when I'm talking naturally. So even though like I'm doing right now, see how I stopped and I can start and I redo my words and all those things. Even doing that is more easily absorbed, I've found, than if I was scripted and reading just, off some, a script, essentially. And you can tell that I would probably just cut this and redo it if I was filming.
Right.
But it's pretty easy because when I do stumble over my words, I'll just go, and jump cuts to your friend. But gosh, people would love to hear your opinions on not just writing and everything, but pop culture generally, because you are a pop culture connoisseur and you kind of need to be as an author anyway. And so they would love to hear your views on how to incorporate history, realism, or anything into fantasy, and even reviewing fantasy. And this is kind of is leading into another question. I'm interested. You don't need to answer. It's perfectly fine. But what were your thoughts of The Last Jedi?
Oh man, how much time do you have? Oh man. Oh man, you're gonna get me in trouble. See what I can say. Let's see what I can say.
We could try and keep it
short. So I have worked my entire career to try and create characters with lasting mythical import and power that will get into people's minds and stay there. And Last Jedi did a lot of things in very cool ways, but I don't know if I will ever be able to get over the fact that Luke Skywalker, who I consider the single greatest mythical character of the last 50 years, right, with the most weight and interest behind him, and basically throwing him away for shock value, that really bugged me.
It is a betrayal. It is an unforgivable betrayal. I hated The Last Jedi so much. But sorry, that's just me.
No, really, I can understand trying to do something different with a character. Mm-hmm. This is okay, and this is why, even though I didn't necessarily like how they turned out, I'm not so down on Zack Snyder's DC movies as a lot of people are, because I'm like, hey, this was a valid thing to try. Mm-hmm. It's not that different from Red Sun or Dark Knight Returns, right? It didn't really work, didn't come together. But with Luke Skywalker, I'd be okay with a different take on the character, but this felt like just a shock value, toss him away. This character, I think you'd be hard pressed to find anyone, maybe Harry Potter, right? Only valid argument of someone equal to Luke Skywalker in the public consciousness of a character. And Luke was such a character of optimism and hope. Yep. And people say, well, this is how Obi-Wan and Yoda ended up. So obviously it's not that bad for Luke to end up that way. And that kind of misses the point that Luke was breaking that, right? Luke represented the new guard who was not going to have that happen. And just knowing that Mark Hamill didn't think highly of this interpretation,
I know. It was a complete
uh,
betrayal of his character. And it's just like, what? And then the plot holes. But sorry, I don't want to get sidetracked. I have made a video venting on my thing, but
you? I didn't even watch that one, but I'll agree with you. And Rian Johnson knows how to make a good film. And he was trying things that on paper are really interesting, but I think most of them flop spectacularly, which can oftentimes teach us a lot. Like, I don't even blame Rian Johnson. I think that this is a problem that goes back to not having good beta readers, not listening to feedback, not looking. Like, if you were to read the first drafts of some of my books, I bet you would find some problems as big as Last Jedi problems. Because when you're writing a book, there are things you tried, you're like, what if I tried this? You spitball things. When I took on the Wheel of Time, one of the things I spitballs, I'm like, what if Perrin became a pacifist and followed the way of Lee?
Oh,
right?
Wow.
And I spitballed that. I looked at it for about 30 seconds and said, oh, yeah, this is
run away.
Run away from that. But it's the sort of thing you need to be willing to spitball. Yeah. And having him spitball these things is not a terrible idea. Having spitballing, like, The Last Jedi presents a couple of really interesting concepts. The concept of the rebels are basically a group of anti-authoritarian anarchists, right? That's what they represent in society. They are trying to tear down the government, and you were going to attract a bunch of anarchists. And so what do you do? How do you maintain military discipline in a group full of people whose main goal is to tear down a government, right? So you can have a really interesting conflict between here's the hothead anarchists and here is the people who say, wait, we need to have military discipline too. That on paper is a great idea for Star Wars, I think. It failed spectacularly in the movie.
In execution, absolutely.
Right? And it's just amazing at how well some of these things flopped, despite having really cool ideas behind them and really interesting intentions. So on one hand, I'm really glad the movie's there. On the other hand, if I could erase it from existence just for the Luke Skywalker thing, I would do it.
That's funny because, like, in my mind, I don't even consider it canon. It's like I can't even watch the next movie because it's following on from what happened in this one.
Hey, I was in line for the Phantom Menace for 7 hours on opening day, right? So I've been through this before, the original movies, I showed them to my kids last year. And I was transfixed every step of the way. Even though there are certain things in there that I look back at, I'm like, ugh. Han, you should not back Leia into a corner and tell her yes. That's just not a good idea. There are definitely things in these movies, but I still love them every step, and I will always love, even though a lot of people think that Empire is the best, and I'll agree technically the best, I will always love Return of the Jedi for giving me an epic fantasy storyline that deals with good and evil and hope and redemption. Even if some of it was clunky and even if Ewoks are a little too cute, that final battle between Luke and Vader represents everything that I love about storytelling. And I was just transfixed all the way through. The old ones, again. And my kids watch them, right? Yeah. My kids love them, and so I still think they hold up. But these days, if someone asks me Star Wars or Star Trek, I kind of have to err on Trek because they've had multiple good adaptations. And Star Wars is... I will stand up for JJ's Force Awakens. I think that movie had to do a couple of things, and it maybe played a little too safe, but following the prequels, playing a little too safe may have been the only thing to do. And I came out of that movie loving the new characters.
This is why I mentioned to you, you do so well on YouTube, because even this subject alone, that's a YouTube video right there, Brandon. And it would do.
But you're going to get in trouble, right? The problem is, what happens if Rian Johnson comes to me and says, "Hey, Brandon, I want to make one of your movies."
Yeah, that's true.
And I have to say, don't go watch Shad. Tear apart The Last Jedi and things like that. So I have to work with these people. So just warning you. This is why you don't hear a lot of reviews from me, and if you do, you hear me talking about what I love. I do work with a lot of these people,
and I did actually suspect that as well. So, but still, even because you're able to focus on the good, and you did bring up some interesting points. Like I love what you were saying about there are certain things like the actual intention behind what they were trying to do is a really interesting, and it could work really well for Star Wars and stuff. That's awesome. And so even if it isn't direct reviews, I think wow, you would kill it on YouTube. People love to hear your opinion. You have such interesting things to say. So that's just my bit of encouragement in that field right there.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Not a problem. All right, Brandon, another important question. Favorite superhero?
Does Magneto count, or do you have to call him a villain?
I'll let Magneto. Why do you like Magneto so much?
Okay. When I bond the characters, it's generally because I'm a very analytical person. I like story, I like structure, I like motivations. And when I see a character, even when I was a kid and didn't know why I was connecting with them, or I see a movie where the structure is like perfect, right? Like Die Hard, right? Structure of Die Hard is just a thing of beauty to behold that, I don't just hear Beethoven because of the movie when I watch it. I hear Beethoven because this structure is so tight, right? And A New Hope has that. When I see a character who works beautifully as a villain that has an amazing backstory, that is the hero in his own story and is so relatable and interesting, because so many villains are disposable. And so I know it personally, it is so hard to create a character with the complexity and motivation of Magneto when he's done right, that I just love things like that. They're things of beauty to me. I do really like Spider-Man also for similar reasons. The history of Spider-Man being Stan Lee and co-creator, who I can't remember who it is, together looking and saying, people really love Superman, but people also have really loved when Superman gets a kid's sidekick. Why is that? Well, one is, there's this polar between two storytelling archetypes of the person who is a Superman, the James Bond, the Aragorn, who has all the attributes we idealize and want to have. And then there's the character who is the everyman, the Samwise Gamgee, the character who represents who we really are and the nobility in who we really are, right? And then a lot of the reason the hero's journey works is because it's this person becoming this person, right? This person's innate nobility being rewarded through the course of struggle to becoming someone whose outward powers match their inward character. And so a story like someone like Spider-Man, where he is the kid who gains the superpower and goes through basically the hero's journey in one issue, that story is really, really tight, really well told, really interesting, and it hits all the buttons. And so I look for stuff like that. I really like it when things click like that.
Oh, yeah. Spider-Man. Spider-Man is my pick. Like, he would be my favorite. And it's the more traditional kind of depiction of Spider-Man that's mostly more accurately depicted in the comics. Sam Raimi films did it really well. And they've edged a bit away in the most recent Far From Home. Didn't like it as much, but Spider-Man, absolutely top of the list. Followed second probably by Captain America.
Yeah. Oh, Captain America has another one of those journeys, right? Particularly how they like his complete arc in the MCU is wonderful. The Russo brothers are to blame for a lot of that, of it turning out so well, I think, because they kind of shepherded him all the way through. But the MCU has done some amazing things. I'm really pleased with it. There are weaker movies, there are stronger movies, there are things like, for instance, Spider-Man can never exist in the MCU in a way that he could in the Sam Raimi movies. And the same because of that, I don't feel like Spider-Man can ever be quite as great in the MCU, despite the new movies both being good. Because so much of Spider-Man is opposition of the media and things, and maybe in the without spoilers, the new ones will try to do that.
We'll see. We'll have to see.
But that pressure that made Spider-Man 2, where he gives up his powers, is like something that can't really exist in the MCU. But as a whole, I'm in awe of the MCU. I think they've done some amazing things.
It's incredible. And it's an interesting thing about Captain America, right? I liked Captain America before he was popular, Like, I was in high school, and I actually got teased for liking Spider-Man and comic books and all that stuff. Yeah. It's just, one of my elitist claims to puritanism right there. It's like, the true comic book here. But yeah, like Captain America.
Clone Saga? That was your era, right?
That was my era. You're absolutely right. That was one of the first arcs I read at...
You were falling in love with Spider-Man during the Clone era. That is a claim to fame right there.
Thank you. Right there. Yeah, like a kid had the comic books on my bus that I went to school, and I was like, comic books? And so he let me read them, and it was the Clone arc, and I was just like... It was so good. All right, so I've been wondering this for a while, Brandon. What is your favorite Magic the Gathering format?
Powered Cube Draft.
Ooh, that's intense right there. I'm pretty basic. I was like, I like block. Just get any deck made from a specific block against any other deck from a specific block. That's generally my cup of tea.
Wait, if you're ever in Utah, come draft my cube.
Ooh, I will hold you to that, but
you take me up on that.
I will.
I've collected quite the cube over the years, and so it's another one of those things that you give a fantasy author a little too much success, and what do? They go buy beta magic cards and build a cube out of it and stuff. So
okay, so what I want to talk about now is kind of the more meat of this entire interview, right? And it's going back to what we were briefly talking about at the beginning of where we started, is the interaction between realism and fantasy, the intersection between the two, and when one kind of supersedes the other. And so from your own perspective, why do you think realism is important in fantasy? Because one of the things that it frustrates me. It comes up so much, and people say it's fantasy. It doesn't need to be realistic. And I hear that, and like a slap in the face, and I'm like, sure. Why do we have gravity then? They can just float off into the sky.
Yeah.
Of course you need realism, but one of the things that I do with my YouTube channel is actually push that further. Let's try and make it more realistic. And for me, it's about immersion. It's because you want these fantasy worlds to feel real. But this is my own perspective. I want to hear your perspective. Why do you feel realism is so important?
You nailed it there. I can still remember how much it meant to me as a new reader when I picked up The Hobbit, right? And the map in The Hobbit is the map they had in the book, right? And as a reader, that helped me so much to say, oh, this is a real thing. Mm-hmm. I can pretend, like I can go reference this map because this is their map, right? I don't have to leave the fantasy world to flip forward to look at the map. And I always thought Tolkien just kind of nailed the whole idea of what we're trying to do in epic fantasy right from the get-go, which if you've ever heard me talk about it, I feel like, my theory on Tolkien is that he was so good that he was so far ahead of his time that it just kind of ruined fantasy for a while in a good way. But it was like he started epic fantasy, and then everyone's like, what is this? We've had Conan, we've had Alice in Wonderland, but this is something completely different, and we don't know what this is. Mm-hmm. And then he went and died, and then everyone's like, oh no, I guess we'll have to try to do it ourselves. And that immersion has always stuck with me. Another book that does this great is Watchmen. I don't know if you've read Watchmen, but I love Watchmen. And if you guys haven't read Watchmen, Watchmen includes this cool ephemera. Like in the back of one of the issues of Watchmen is like the order form for one of the figures that you can order of the in-world character action figures, and it has like the notes from one of the characters saying about how they're gonna edit this figure or change it, or his thoughts on his figure, what it should look like. And those sorts of things really are an aid to me, because fantasy sense of immersion is, I think, one of our key emotional touchstones. Mm-hmm. When you pick up that book and you read, and this is why we get so passionate about our fantasy and things like that, is because when you pick it up, we know it's not real. We aren't these people who are living in fantasy worlds, and but we want to believe it's real while we're there, because it lets us connect with the characters on an emotional level. And the whole point of fiction, in my opinion, is to let you connect to people who are different from yourself, so you can live someone else's life for a short time. And it just is an empathy machine. It helps us understand the world. It helps us understand other people. That's fiction, right? And epic fantasy has a strike against it in that it's so different from our experience. And so to make these characters connect better, I feel like we should do everything we can in a reasonable way to make it feel like an authentic experience when you're reading the story, to facilitate that emotional connection.
One of the other things that I kind of find interesting about fantasy and creating this kind of connection and stuff is when you're trying to share a theme or an idea, one of the tools that is done in fantasy, but it's also done in scripture, I find as well, is where the example is extreme. Like, if you want to talk about enduring hardship, well, we have Job in the Bible. You want to talk about, it's the extreme example. And so you want to endure a hardship? Well, let's have a Dark Lord overtaking the entire world, okay? And and in this extreme example, showing a theme or idea, like heroism, nobility, self-sacrifice, and stuff like that, it causes these ideals to stand out more and for it to be more noticeable by the reader, to think, wow, that is really noble, that is great, I want to be like that. And for me, superheroes was the thing that had that impact on me. Like I was a superhero nut. I wanted to be a superhero when I was a kid. Like I'm not joking when I say that. I asked Santa Claus for superpowers. Like this is all real. And
practical, very practical.
I was trying to figure out how to get them, and I was like, well, finding a genie bottle's too difficult. I don't know. I have any genetically altered spiders. That's different.
Right. Radiation, real dangerous.
Yeah, I know. But Santa. Yeah, like there you go. That was my master plan.
Well, this whole concept is very, maybe this is my pop science side talking, but when you do an experiment, you try to create a control, and you didn't try to change one thing dramatic. And I think fantasy lets us create a control in a very interesting way, in a different sort of way. Like if you want to talk about biases and how people deal with biases, controlling for that is very hard because of all the baggage that we bring to it, which is all legitimate baggage. But when you can say, all right, in the fantasy world, they are biased against people because of their eye color, I can maybe divorce a little bit of this baggage, control, and have one weird thing, and therefore explore at the core of the idea of what it is to be biased against the other in a way that approaches it from a different direction.
Exactly. And with my own example, it had such a positive impact on me. These extreme examples of heroes and everything like that, where I wanted to be one, it actually, aside from my quest to get superpowers, made me a better person. I was like, a superhero would obey their parents. They won't break the rules. If I want to be a superhero, I better be. And so I was a pretty darn good kid. And largely that came to me from my influence of superheroes as a kid. And it's, again, the extreme examples. And that's the other, exactly, just what you're saying, with one of the great advantages of fantasy is because they are extreme examples of core concepts and themes that can then be translated to the reader, which might generally be harder for them to clue onto if the example wasn't as extreme. So in other words, fantasy is the best genre in the world, people. We just
absolutely.
I mean,
it's like I always say, right? Like if you can write anything in fantasy you want to write. It's the only genre that does that, right? If once you add dragons, you're ours, right? You don't get to be your genre anymore. You become our genre.
Exactly.
But when we add mystery, we're still fantasy.
Yep.
You can find great mysteries like in the fantasy genre. You can find great romances. You can find great action adventure. You can find great literature, right? N.K. Jemisin is proving that you can make modernist fiction of the most high caliber in fantasy. She didn't need to prove it because Ursula already proved that, but it's done, right? But once you add something cool, you're ours forever.
That's exactly. And I've loved that quote of yours for so long. It's like, fantasy, you could do a romance, but with dragons. And it goes back to one of my favorite, questions. What about dragons? That's exactly right.
That's what pulled me in, right? The fact that, for those who don't know, the first 3 fantasy books I read, discounting The Hobbit. I really did like The Hobbit, but I got stuck in Lord of the Rings as a kid and didn't read fantasy for years. And the 3 that pulled me in were Dragonsbane by Barbara Hamley, Dragon Prince by Melanie Ron, and Dragonflight by Anne McCaffrey. And that, 1, 2, 3 punch of excellent fantasy with really interesting worlds, really dynamic characters, and dragons is everything I needed. Have you read Dragonsbane?
No, I haven't. I have such a list of just phenomenal books I need to get to, and I'm unfortunately falling into the same boat that you have. It's time now. It's gosh.
Why I love Dragonsbane. If you don't know the premise of Dragonsbane, it is a guy has slain a dragon in his youth. He's the last living dragon slayer. A new dragon comes to the kingdom. They go to find him, and he's a pig farmer up in the north in this small town, and he's like in his 50s. I can't remember, but he's old, right? Older. As a guy in his 40s now. 40 doesn't feel old, but he's like in his 40s or 50s. And they're like, we need to slay this dragon. He's like, I'm an old dude now. I can't slay a dragon anymore, but they really need it. So he's like, how do I slay a dragon if I can't just ride up and spear it? We got to come up with a real, interesting way for you to kill a dragon without going hand to hand with it. And the story is all about how would you really slay a dragon?
I love it.
Feels very Shad to me.
All right, it's on my list. Done. I'm going to look at it. So this is an interesting question, right? This is kind of for the writer, fans and stuff. If you were to launch your writing career today, okay, if you had just finished Atlantis, say today, how would you go about trying to get that book to the public? What would be the options or methods you would try?
If I were going to break in today, I might be a few years behind because I don't pay as much attention to self-publishing as maybe I should. During those early years, kind of the Wild West of self-publishing, the conventional wisdom was to become a platform writer, which is the Larry Correia method or the John Scalzi method, though John ended up going traditional. But the idea being that you build a platform around something you are passionate about and you're interested in and you can talk about in an intelligent way. And then once you have that platform, start marketing your books that way. You have to be authentic, like you are, actually love the thing and be good at it, which you are.
Thank you.
But that was the way to break in. A lot of people have said these days that that's getting harder and harder to get an audience with, and they recommend self-published authors focus on the books instead. Basically the two routes to self-publishing, as I understand it now. This is coming from someone outside your world, and so take anything I say with a grain of salt here. But what I've seen is either you become a platform writer or you just write a bunch of books as fast as you can, and you release them in quick succession to try to do a media blitz that way. But I would say if you can end up having a successful YouTube channel with like 600,000 subscribers or something? Almost seven. Then, the kind of sad fact is, in some ways, that's already going to be more successful than most writers will ever earn for their income, right?
When you look at the figures, what people, make is like, But the thing is, I enjoy writing so much. It's always been, I want to do the writing thing. But YouTube is also hugely satisfying and fun to do as well. I'm not saying don't do it.
That happened to Michael Crichton. Michael Crichton?
I've heard of him.
Michael Crichton wrote Jurassic Park. He wanted to be a director and a screenwriter, and he couldn't break in, so he started writing novels, thinking that the prestige of the novels would let him then break into Hollywood. He eventually became the producer of ER and things like that. But he became wildly successful as a novelist to the point that he was more successful as a novelist than he was as a filmmaker. You went backwards. You became a filmmaker first, and really took off on that.
And like I said, I never expected to take off, but I didn't complain when it did, and of course that enabled the publishing of my own novel to be really, really successful. So that's been overwhelmingly awesome.
The way I broke my career in, I did a lot of conscious decisions, and one of them was during that era having a standalone fantasy with some thoughtful themes to it was a good way to stand out. When I published, epic fantasy was on a downturn. I don't know if you know about the kind of famous epic fantasy downturn from about 98 to 2004. Epic fantasy was nobody was breaking in. Steven Erikson had the hardest time, and he's a brilliant writer, right? And he's the only one of that era who really even got any traction. It was just a famously hard time. Basically, what was happening is that fans were being sucked to YA because of Harry Potter and Garth Nix and some of the people doing cool things there, or to urban fantasy, because right at the end of that is when Twilight started and things like that. And so epic fantasy was just a hard sell, and kind of having a Elantris more as a little bit of a prestige piece, as a standalone, and these sorts of things was a conscious decision, followed by an action-heavy trilogy that kind of did a little more of the stuff I like to do, which is kind of turn the genre on its head, play with magic systems in kind of an action-oriented way, and that sort of stuff. So these were all kind of very conscious decisions. Today, I would approach it differently. I would probably shoot for fast-paced, shorter books and do the blitz, right? I would write for a few, take a couple years, write 3 or 4, if you can, 6 shorter 70,000 word books. If this is not what you like to do, don't have to do it, right? But these are things that feel a little more like Alloy of Law or Steelheart or my shorter books that are meant to be a little more, I describe them as hamburgers instead of steaks, right? And I would write 5 or 6 of those. I would save them. I would do a blitz with them and self-publishing. Now, if I were dead set on epic fantasy, I would write the epic fantasies that I love, and I would send them around to the big 5 publishers, and then I would do that for maybe 5 years, meaning I would write 1 a year or 2 a year for 5 years. 1 a year is probably more realistic for someone who has to work a day job. And if they all got rejected, I would then save those 5 books, and then I'd do the media blitz with those, but I'd put like 2 months in between them each, and I would try to build, saying, big epic fantasy, new writer, I'm going to try to self-publish with this. I do think generally traditional is a little better for epic fantasy just because your space between books is going to be so big that you're going to need the bigger marketing budget and blitz, but traditional is not as great as that as they used to be.
It's tricky because I was very interested to try and find out the average, amount of money a traditionally published fantasy book will do. And because if you're going to be going into traditional, it's probably better to bet on the fact that you're not going to be a blockbuster success, that you're going to be one of the more run-of-the-mill kind of things.
You're going to build if you're going to get success. I mean, even if you look at the current, the current 5 best-selling fantasy authors in the world, right, are Sapkowski, right, with The Witcher, George Martin, Neil Gaiman. Do you count as an epic fantasy? Maybe, maybe not. Me. And Pat, right? And if you look at those, there's only one overnight success in those 5. That's Pat. Yeah. Only one of us hit big on our first book. The rest of us toiled for quite a long time and slowly built to the current sort of renown that we have. And Jim Butcher, who would be number 6 on the list, is probably, you make the same argument for him. So, if you're going to go traditional, odds are if you get published, your first book is not going to be huge, and you're going to build to being huge if you even get there.
Yeah. If you're willing to share, you don't need to share this, but I am very interested to know how many copies Elantris sold in its first month, if you have that on hand.
So Elantris sold 400 copies in its first week, and then around 300 to 200 each of the following weeks in that first month.
See, that's a very interesting baseline.
It, a little better than that. It was probably like 400, 300, 300, 300. Which, when I got those first numbers, 400 copies, I was like, oh no, I am sunk. Really? I am dead. And my agent was like, oh no, those are great numbers.
Really?
400 copies in a week by a brand new author, you're just fine. Particularly if you stay up there. It eventually ended up selling about 10,000 in hardcover, first year-ish, around 10,000, which for the time, epic fantasy was having troubles breaking in. Sure, George and Jordan and RJ could sell tons, but there just wasn't anybody else selling a ton of books right then. I mean, Terry Goodkind, maybe, but the Terry Goodkind and George Martin, both their books came out in 95, and Robin Hobb, who'd also be up there in the top 10 for sales. Her first book in her new series after we changed her name came out in like 96 or 97. So there'd been nobody in like 7-8 years who'd broken in big in epic fantasy. So the fact that I sold 400 copies was a big deal to my agent. I thought it sounded terrible.
Well, this is really important, I find, for aspiring writers to get a good baseline and understand what they should be able to expect and stuff. The biggest thing for me with self-publishing is having some way to market the book. Because if no one knows about it, you're not going to sell any. And of course, my master plan was with YouTube, and because that took off, and I'm only saying this to give a baseline. It isn't like a comparison kind of thing, but by having the YouTube channel, I've been able to sell 11,000 copies in the first month. And so
that's like amazing, right? Like that's what Elantris sold in its entire first year.
Not all self-published authors have a fan base or a YouTube kind of channel or anything like that.
I mean, the lucky ones do,
the lucky ones do. Well, I actually started my YouTube channel for the express purpose of having a fan base to launch my writing career. I didn't expect.
That's really smart.
I didn't expect it would take off the way it did. I thought, hey, if I've got 1,000, 2,000 subscribers, that's better than nothing. I'm happy to do that because I set out to be an author in 2007, and so trying to learn how to do it. Your writing university lectures were phenomenal, by the way.
Thank you. And sorry about the sound on those early ones.
Oh, that's all right. I've listened to all of them, actually, like the ones that were put up by Write About Dragons and then BYU English and then Camera Panda, all those. They're just phenomenal. They're really good. And I've recommended them to aspiring authors on my own channel as well, saying, if you want to learn about it, go check out these lectures. And so, even all the way back then, I was listening and trying to figure out the craft, as it were.
Well, that's really smart because, and that's the value of the platform writing that I was talking about. Like if you can pull off a Scalzi or a Cory Doctorow or a you, where you get an audience by being eloquent and cool in another way.
I'm trying.
Yeah. Then selling your book, the eyes will be on it. And then if you write a good book, it'll just take off. It's that spark. Everyone's having so much trouble doing this because self-publishing is fantastic.
Oh, it's amazing.
It has changed the market in all wonderful ways, but with some bad side effects. Well, hard side effects. It's so much harder to launch a book now for everyone.
Oh, there's
self-published and
It's such a learning curve. Like, people they think they'll write a book. It's like, no. After you write the book, there's editing. And after you do all that editing, first beta reading, editing, proofreading, all that stuff. Right after all that, there's formatting. And either you need to pay someone to do it or you need to learn how to do it. And that was a learning curve for me. Like, and formatting like in a way that's professional, that looks good, that fits on the page, and then it meets the standards of publishing. And then there's the cover art. And then not only after you pay for the cover art and get the cover art, it's formatting the cover art. There's all oh wow. I mean, it's a lot easier for me now having learnt through it, but oh boy, was it a learning curve. My goodness.
Having done this, one of the things that I've done that I think was I kind of lucked into it, but I think was also very smart, is over the last 14 years I built a team, right? My success has allowed me, I have 10 people for my company. I count myself as one of those, but we're a 10-person team right now. And that includes an in-house artist, Isaac, whose full-time job is to do art for the books or to hire out cover art and things. Includes a full-time editor, Peter, who does all the copy edits and all the, I still have an editor at my publisher who does a lot of the substantive edits. But Peter's, really, really handy. And it includes a full-time shipping person to ship out books and handle all of that, and a full-time marketing and publicity person. And with this whole team, reason I did this in part is because we're still not sure if publishing is going to implode, if traditional publishing is going to implode.
It's a very interesting thing, because especially producing my own audiobook, and I mean, it's not for the faint of heart. I'll say there's a lot of work involved with it, and there's costs involved. I wouldn't have been able to do it if I didn't have my YouTube income, because YouTube really took off. I was able to get some of the best. Michael Kramer and Kate Redding.
Did you hire Michael and Kate?
Yeah, they did my audiobook.
Oh man, they're so amazing.
The best.
This is an aside, but if you ever do a signing in the DC area, sometimes they're willing to come and do your reading for you. And I had to do that. And it's so much fun to pause and say, all right, the reading will be done by Michael Kramer. So anyway.
Well, and I mean, the other interesting thing, if I was to do traditional publishing, I'm not sure the finished product, I think the editing would be of a higher standard because it's really hard to find a good editor independently. And because of that, I actually have found a good editor after publishing that. Now we're working on a second edition just to iron out those wrinkles.
Yep.
And so I think you're going to get a big advantage traditionally publishing in that regard. But aside from that, I'm not sure the book would have been of a higher standard than what I've been able to produce myself because you need to invest a lot of money. And I'm not sure a traditional publisher would have been willing to do that for a debut, novelist who doesn't have much background. I'm not sure they would have hired Michael and Kate to do the audio book. I'm not sure they would.
I managed to get them for Mistborn, so I think you could. Yeah. But you do have a legit argument here. I mean, I would say the biggest advantages of traditional are, number one, the editors, as you pointed out. The best editors do tend to still be at the traditional publishing companies. They want a stable income. They want to not worry about money. They just want to read books. And so there's that. The other thing you get are these kind of unfair advantages, meaning even Amazon. All bookstores, Amazon included, have pay to be their space, right? If you want to be advertising on the front page of Amazon when you land there, or if you want to be in the step ladder at the front of the Barnes & Noble when you walk in, publishers are paying for that space. And it's highly contested who gets that space, and it's generally not put up for bid to any of the self-published authors. Yeah. That doesn't mean that you'll get it.
Yeah, that was my question. What is the likelihood of a debut novelist getting that space anyway with traditional publishing?
Yeah. So it does happen. It does happen. In fact, you need an agent who'll fight for it and who knows what it's worth. You need to have convinced them that they need to put the money, and oftentimes that means convincing them to give you a big advance. They pay $100,000 for your advance. They're going to pay the $20,000 to get you a good placement because they have to make the money back.
How common is that for a debut novelist, though, $100,000 advance? Because that's huge.
So used to be terrible. Yeah. You never got it. But what's happening with self-publishing, and this is both good and bad, is it's pushing the big five toward more of a blockbuster mentality, to the idea that if they're going to publish a debut author, they need to be publishing them big because otherwise they get lost. So what they tend to do now is the advances are creeping up, but the number of people they're buying is creeping down. I still think your average is going to be 10 grand. It's traditional publishing, and it used to be 5. I bet it's up to around 10 now. In genre, I don't know that for sure, but that would be my guess. That's what I got for Elantris. And with 10 grand, are you going to get anything? Who knows, right?
Yeah.
And so this is why a hybrid approach or a straight self-publishing approach is the way I would break in now if I were doing it. It's just the smarter way to go.
But I just wanted to quickly explain what the advance is for people who don't know. And that's when you publish, they will pay you an advance that's basically taken off the royalties that the book needs to make back before you'll start to get royalties on the book. And so the advance...
it doesn't earn that much, you get to keep the advance. But if it doesn't earn that much, that's a really bad sign.
So there we go. Just to clear that up. The things that you can, like the fact that my book is available worldwide, and you could go to most bookstores and order it in, and it's available online and everything through traditional publishing, and it's Ingram Spark that gives you that reach. And by the way, if people are wondering Kindle Direct Publishing versus Ingram Spark, okay? You can get hardcover through Ingram Spark, their distribution is wider, and you can get them in brick and mortar stores. So absolutely. But the fact that they have printing facilities all over the world, it blows my mind. I can't believe it that you can do that self-publishing. There are people in Germany sending me pictures of my book, and I'm like, I did this all from my my office at home. It's just absolutely amazing.
I would say if someone out there is going to go traditional, you do still need to be in charge of your business, right? Self-publishing is a little harder in this regard, but not much harder. You still should be doing all this stuff traditional, which is sad because that should be the great advantage of traditional publishing, right? You don't have to pay any attention to anything but writing the books. But what authors don't understand before they break in is that becoming a writer is starting a small business. It's in a lot of ways like saying, I'm going to start a company where I make homemade shoes and I sell them, right? Like, you don't have to actually manufacture the books, but I mean, it's such a weird business, right? I have friends who are in other companies, other industries, and they will say, they'll be amazed by our business because if we were making shoes, we would have one part in the whole chain, even if we're the CEO. But to make the comparison, for authors, we make the shoes. Right? We design the shoes, and then we do the actual work of making the shoes. We don't glue them together, granted. But, then we're the celebrity who wears the shoes, right? We do all the publicity. You can't give them to some. We're the salesman, and we're the CEO, right? We have the business person who has to control this. You're not working for the publisher, even if you go traditional. You are an independent author who is licensing your book to somebody, and you got to be in charge of and understand how the business works. So you're going to have to wear a ton of hats.
And I've even heard from traditionally published authors that are not huge, but they're traditionally published, that they basically got no marketing budget on their deal, and all the marketing of their novel basically fell on themselves, and they have to try and sell it. I find it really interesting that even from now you'll probably look at self-publishing, and there are so many interesting advantages that come with self-publishing. But I think one of the biggest differences is like the editing, the producing, the formatting, the cover art, the audiobook production, that's all handled by the publisher, and that can save you so much time. Now, if you're a control freak like me, handling it all, I love doing. It was a lot of work, a lot of all-nighters, and I mean a lot of work. To launch my audiobook properly, to get the good revenue share, I needed to register a US-based LLC. And so you got to do,
that's crazy.
Yeah.
See, the thing about it is if I self-published, I would not be doing any of that anyway. I would have my whole team to be able to do it.
Exactly.
So, it is a lot of work.
It is. And so people do need to be aware of that. But if you like having a control and you're willing to do the work, there are some amazing advantages with self-publishing. And the money is good. It's pretty good self-publishing as well, which is a big thing. And I guess people would be interested in knowing the difference. And I could just rattle off some quick figures here. So ebook, if you go through Amazon, you can get 70% on the ebook, but that's only if it is priced under $10. If it's over $10, you're only going to make 30%.
The publishers can make 70% on the higher price point, which is one of the unfair advantages
that's interesting.
that they have. So even though the price Way of Kings or this new Stormlight book, Way of Kings is down now, but the price new Stormlight book at like $16, they still get the 70%.
Wow, that's great.
But I get 25% of that. So I get 17.5%.
Yep.
I can do it on a higher price point, which,
Doesn't
you know, I
balance
think,
out.
yeah, it doesn't balance out. You're getting 70, I'm getting 17.5. I'll get 15% of cover. You'll get what on your print books?
Oh, that's tricky because print always varies. At the moment, it's selling for $16, and I'm making about $3 or $4. $3 per paperback. A hardcover is more.
All right, so you're getting about 20%, right?
It's about there, I think.
Yeah. So the print version is not that different.
Yeah,
actually.
yeah. Like that's the other thing people need. Like the print amount that you get, traditional and self-publishing, they're very comparable because Ingram Spark that does the print, they have their printing cost, which is very comparable to what the publisher would generally take. And then there's audiobook, and so if you're going through Audible, you will only get 20%. Unless you do an exclusivity contract, which means your audiobook is only available through Amazon, iTunes, and Audible. And if you do that, you'll get 40%. And that's great.
And we can get the 40% not exclusive in the industry through traditional. That 40%, though, remember, most of you're going to see a cover price for that audiobook of like $40, right? That's not what that audiobook is selling for. It's selling for one credit.
Exactly. And that's like $15.
Keep that in mind. The money's still great because if you're getting 40% of $15, you're still making more off of that than any other edition, most likely in traditional publishing even. But I'm, we're getting 40. So what I've done is I've sold my audiobooks directly to Audible, even though not all of them, but some of them. And the publisher has been willing to, when I go through Tor, I get a comparable amount from them. So,
and this is interesting because some people say that the money is like hugely better in traditional, but I've actually, in self-publishing, but I've actually seen traditional publishing coming up and to be quite comparable in certain fields.
Only place is ebooks. Ebooks, you're way better off self-publishing, and publishers have been hardline on this because they know if they bend on it, they bend on that 25%, then they're gonna have to do it for everyone. And so the only way around that in the industry right now is to be big enough to become your own imprint and to co-publish, which is what Stephen King does, right? Stephen King doesn't take advances on his books. Stephen King is just a partner with the publisher, and that's actually what I do now. I just partner with the publisher, but that I can do that because I have a whole publishing system on my side, right? They have lower expenses on me because I have my own art director. They don't have to art direct. They don't have to have anybody. It goes directly to the artists and things like that. And it's also more risky because I pay for half of my publicity. So I get great publicity and marketing budgets, but half of it is my money, right? So it's not something that works real well on the small scale, but that's why we have self-publishing.
So I loved just that. It's so interesting, especially hearing, the thoughts from someone who is so experienced on the inside with traditional publishing and seeing some of the pros and cons. And I know we could talk more on it, and perhaps we will indeed in the future. But for now, alas, time is escaping us, and so we will need to wind up this hugely entertaining interview. I've loved it so much. Brendan, thank you.
It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for coming over here to Shadiversity and sharing not only your wisdom but also your insights in many topics. It has been hugely fulfilling, and as you guys are able to find out, Stormlight 4, we might see some interesting weaponsy, combaty stuff there.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.